My name is Rhys Williams. I am a lecturer in Energy and Environmental Humanities in the English Literature Department at the University of Glasgow. And if I had to describe what I do, or my practice, I suppose, I would say that I'm interested in the power and the kind of facility of the traditional tools of English literature. So, close reading, attention to form, aesthetics, narrative, rhetoric, and so on. The way that those tools can be brought to bear on things other than texts. In particular, for me, I'm interested in the way that narratives and infrastructures sort of relate and entwine and reinforce each other, particularly in bringing new technologies to market. So I'm interested in kind of emergent or new technologies like solar power or new food processing techniques, and the ways that narrative is deployed in order to kind of bring into being the infrastructure, and the way that the infrastructures are then solidified or reinforced by the narratives. "2020 was quite an unusual year for all of us, but the lockdown and the COVID situation were intensified, I suppose, in some ways by the birth of my second child late on in 2020. And if I was to think about how the year has changed my priorities or changed me, I suppose we've spent a lot of time in our local area, and it's really brought to attention something which I talk about a lot in my work potentially, but not live it quite as much, which is a kind of connection to place and a kind of genuine knowledge of place, I suppose, what it means to actually know your local area, which of course means knowing the community as much as anything. And that really has been brought home by the kind of enforced locality of the last year, and the daily walks with the kids and so on, just to get outside. That kind of close attention to place has been a revelation for me, I suppose, because previously I talked about it a lot, but perhaps I wasn't aware of how little I lived it. And the other thing, I suppose, would be perhaps something which is quite common, but definitely a refiguring of what's important, in the sense of what am I spending my time doing, and seeing some things that previously took my attention and that I felt were important, particularly in work, things to do with work, those seeming less important, and actually a kind of reevaluation of what you would call a work-life balance, I suppose. Just a making straight of that balance, a rebalancing of that balance, because the end of last year, with the birth of the child and the difficulties of kind of COVID teaching online and so on, it was a difficult few months, and I think it came as a little bit of a shock to me just how much non-family life had taken over my life. So yeah, an opportunity for rebalancing in many ways. Really brought home as well, obviously, by the lack of being able to see family who don't live very close, them not being able to see the grandkids and so on. That's all been quite hard. So yeah, bringing back to centre attention the importance of the people around you in more ways than one, I suppose, family and community. I do definitely see a lot of potential in solar power and alternative energy systems. For me, the question is more around how that potential is articulated, how it becomes real. The potential is in this kind of utopian promise of decentralization, a sort of harmony with nature, a kind of greater democratic control over the energy production, as well as its kind of consumption and distribution. But every technological innovation since the Industrial Revolution at least has been accompanied by precisely the same utopian kind of narratives. So just as those were shown to kind of fall short, there is, I think, a definite chance, a strong possibility to be fought against in the present moment, that solar power will also not produce the kind of utopian potentials that it's promising, right? That accompany its emergence into the world. There are some really strong examples, some seeds of a good Anthropocene, in which solar power is, community driven, and which provides communities with, energy sovereignty and so on. And those are excellent examples to be sort of held on to and hopefully scaled up. But on the other side, there is this very large scale development of solar panels for precisely the same kinds of utility as oil and gas have been used for. So large scale companies deploying utility scale solar, no community development or anything like that. In fact, the opposite, right? A kind of colonial impulse, deploying solar panels in deserts in the Sahara and so on to provide Europe with energy. Those older narratives of injustice, just as much as the kind of traditional utopian narratives, are both being mobilized and articulated through solar power when it's kind of brought into being. So yes, there is potential, but it's not a kind of overwhelming potential. It's not something that's guaranteed by any stretch. As always, new moments of newness are knife edges, I suppose, between possibility and threat, and we need to try our best to exacerbate the possibilities over the threats. I think the greatest challenge to environmental justice is probably the entrenched status quo, to be honest. There is a sense in which what we're struggling against are path dependencies and established powers with greater financial agency and mobility than the kind of communities working for environmental justice. If it is possible to bring about environmental justice, then the struggle tends to take place at a relatively local level, so the kind of linking up of these struggles to tackle the larger scale forces which are opposing it is a very necessary kind of tactic, I think. So yeah, it's a little bit of a trite answer, I suppose, in the sense that the thing which opposes or stands in the way of environmental justice is precisely the lack of environmental justice in the present system, and the way that has a tendency to reproduce itself and has, sadly, the means and the kind of power to reproduce itself in the present moment. My wildest energy fantasy is a hard one to answer when your job involves reading solar punk representations of fantastical energy futures which have dragons in them and that kind of thing. Anything I come up with can seem a little tame, I think, in comparison. But I have always enjoyed Timothy Morton's idea that if we had solar panels on the roofs of our houses, we could have a disco in every room. I suppose what I like about it is this idea that we always think about energy in a kind of productive way. We drink coffee so that we can be alert and work efficiently and all of this kind of thing. But actually, a large amount of the joy in life comes from a kind of exuberant and pointless energy expenditure, right? Energy expended for sheer joy. And I suppose a kind of privileging of energy for joy might be, on some level, my wildest energy fantasy. The most radical one, at least.